So this unbound magic, it's dangerous, right? It's one that makes you question yourself, and you question what's the difference between the magic they left and the things we take for granted in this world. Like, what's the difference between gravity and magic? Is gravity magic? Are other people magic? Are they existing purely just by the thoughts they're having? Am I existing purely by the thoughts I'm having? And the problem is, when you start asking these dangerous questions, you start getting dangerous answers.
Do you love science fiction and fantasy books? You found yourself in the right dimension. Welcome to the greatest podcast in the multiverse, where each week I talk to science fiction and fantasy authors about myth, magic, and the infinite possibilities of storytelling. I'm your host, Herman Stuernagel, and I will be taking you on a journey with some of your favorite authors, helping you to get to know them and possibly uncover some new literary gems along the way. Ready to explore? Because on this show, every conversation is a doorway into a different world. So welcome once again to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. I am super excited to have a very special guest with me here today. Jonathan Weiss, welcome here.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
You are very welcome. So you are the author of a couple of series. You've got Molten Flux, which is the first book in your Flux Catastrophe series. And you've got the Hytharo Redux, which is your first Hytharo series. And we're going to get into some of that a little bit. But first, I'd like you just to tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing journey and what's brought you to this point so far.
Yeah, definitely. So I am Australian, as you can hear from my accent. As a side note, is one of my aspirations when the audiobooks do get done. It will be with devastatingly Australian accents. So
Wonderful.
I have been talking to narrators that are very Australian.
Love it.
As far as writing journey goes, I've been writing for about 15 years. So, and that's since I was about 15. So that means, if you're doing the maths, I'm coming up on 30 now. So that's going to be fun.
Alrighty.
I jumped into it full time about 2 years ago. Kind of after COVID, I felt like, look, you know, I've seen all these people going out and kind of chasing their dreams and stuff. I want to do that too. I've been in tech sales, so I had a bit of a nest egg to sit on as well. So nice. I've really been able to sit down and crank out a whole lot of books. As you said, I've got Molten Flux out. I've got the Hytharo Redux out. Molten Flux already has a sequel out in the form of Blazing Flux. I'm working on the third book of that now. And in between that, I'm also going to have the second book in the Hytharo series out, the Hytharo Origin, in August. So I'm releasing one book every about 5 months. So it's been pretty exhausting, but it's all set in the same world. And yeah, it's a series that jumps between each other. So there's lots of Easter eggs hidden there. And yeah, it's just really comprehensive.
Yeah, very cool. So your first published book, so 4 years you've been published then?
2.
2 years, wow.
One, actually less maybe. So I put out the novella at the start of last year, so in March of 2023, and then novels ever since.
And that's amazing. So a whole bunch of that I want to talk about there, but what is your writing day look like? How are you structuring your writing so that you're able to write novels that quickly?
Yeah, structure's a strong word. It's a very confident word you're using there. I have ADHD, which is also something I found out during COVID, which was like a real, that explains a lot kind of thing. So I've noticed I can get really hyper-fixated on things. I can get really into stuff, and writing's always been that one passion that never leaves me. I love telling stories. I love just the feeling of putting my fingers to the keyboard. For those of you watching, I've got a crazy split mechanical keyboard that I'm holding up now. But yeah, I just love writing. So a lot of the day is, if I'm kind of doing a first draft, I'll just sit and punch that out. I'll get maybe like 4,000 or 5,000 words down in a day. A first draft runs about 100,000 words, 125 sometimes. I'm trying to get that shorter so I can write more books faster.
Right.
But yeah, that's the first draft. Then the edits and stuff, that's also something I just really focus on. I don't like to multitask a lot through the day. I have a lot of trouble shifting gears and kind of keeping my focus through it. So if you see like on my Instagram page, there's just like a sudden gap of posts for like a couple weeks, it means I'm writing a new book. So you can kind of tell by that.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. I tend to do that too. You'll see a ton of posts up to a book launch, and then I kind of go quiet for a while because you're
tired.
Yeah, exactly. So that's impressive. So 4,000 to 5,000 words in a day. I'm assuming that's like a good day. how, like, are you outlining your books or are you a pantser? How does that look for you?
I have good intentions about outlining, but yeah, I do end up pantsing a lot. Like the Hythera Redux was a book that had to be pretty meticulously planned for kind of the nature of how it kind of explores both the characters' present and their past and how those two interact, and then how another kind of more distant past interacts with all that. Um, but then, like, I had a bunch of stuff happen kind of in the middle of it where it just took a sudden left turn, and I was really just like flying by the seat of my pants. And I found that patterns happened with a lot of books, like especially with the sequel to Molten Flux. In Blazing Flux, a character just did something halfway through that I didn't expect. I couldn't control it, and I just had to follow it. Outlining is fun, but yeah, ultimately useless. I think I need to do it anyway.
Yeah, I'm similar too. I do try with the outline, but sometimes the characters have other ideas, and sometimes you've got to see where they take you, right?
Do you ever find that, like, if you have too detailed an outline, it makes it a bit dull to write?
I honestly struggle getting too detailed of an outline. When I do an outline, it's typically a sentence or two. I'm just trying to find the beats. I'm just trying to find the direction of my story is going. I find because I get the details in the flow of the draft process. So my outlines, I'm trying now with my current draft. I'm trying to kind of pants my outline is kind of the term. Like I'm just trying to like write a bare minimum chapter and just try not to get lost in the weeds of it. That way, if I have to go back and rewrite it, it's 300 words that I have to redo and not 3,000.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm trying something new with this book. But yeah. So for yourself, what does that outline process look like that you start out with at least?
So I like to start with a good skeleton of like a 3-act structure, and each act is broken into 3 kind of movements inside. Each movement is like 3 chapters itself. So like ideally a book would be exactly 27 chapters if you're keeping up with the maths there. It often doesn't happen that way because, action scenes blow out and other stuff happens. But that's like the outline skeleton I start with. I kind of try and break it down that way and figure out like, all right, what needs to happen in the first act, second act. It really kind of bog standard stuff people have been talking about for 2,000 years. And then, I think as I'm like actually drafting, I'll try to envision not the next scene I'm going to write, but the scene after that, which gives me more motivation to get through the scene I'm currently writing to get to that point.
Okay, gotcha.
It's the excitement. Keeping the excitement alive is the hard bit.
Yeah, that's probably a good approach because you're always looking forward to that next scene to write and keeping one step ahead of yourself.
Definitely.
Yeah, cool. I do want to step back just a little bit because you did mention that you've been writing for 15 years. You've published in the last 2, but you've been writing for quite a while. I have a couple questions around that, but first I just want to know what's the why in your writing? What has kept you writing for that long, and what motivates you to tell stories?
I think it's a little like I said before. I can't stop. I'll have periods if I don't write for like a month. I just feel like my soul's starting to decay. It's always been a big dream to be a published author and try and make a living off that. Try being the operative word, right? And I think that I really feel a great sense of control and agency being able to self-publish, like being able to make all the decisions and being able to not be held up by anything as I do it. So I've really been loving that process as well. As far as like kind of driving inspirations, I do have to thank my wonderful wife because they really do keep me going with all the encouragement as well. It's been really satisfying to put it out into the world and see people not only just like say it's good writing or to like it, but they get really engaged with the concepts itself in there. Like they'll tell me, I really like this thing that happened, or I think this about this thing. Like they'll come to me with these like crazy, almost conspiracy theory like things. And like, it's the ultimate dopamine rush, essentially.
Cool. Yeah. And so that is pushing you from one book to the next kind of deal.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love that. That's really cool. So how about other authors? What other authors have kind of inspired your writing and influenced your work?
Yeah. So first dirty secret, I'm a slow reader.
Okay.
So
Me too.
yeah,
So.
I think I always feel the need to say that because like we see people on Instagram and stuff just blowing through like a book a day. I don't know how they do it.
Yeah, I don't know either.
As far as authors though, I think a lot of it comes down to like stuff I was reading, I guess, when I did start writing. So the Australian author Matthew Riley, he writes all these big action thriller books. It's basically like a Michael Bay movie on a page.
Okay.
I was reading a lot of those at the time, and I really kind of took a lot of the like really fast paced action he writes from that there. Philip Reeve as well. He wrote the Mortal Engine series, you know, your big motorized cities, which I'm sure you can kind of draw some parallels between that and Molten Flux with its big walking fortress. And then like I guess a lot of movies as well, like the Studio Ghibli movies, like especially things like Laputa Castle in the Sky. That's my favorite movie because it's just like this amazing mystical kind of concept of like everyone's just looking for this one floating castle that's supposedly this ultimate weapon.
Very cool. Very
I like big constructs. I like big machines.
Yeah, okay. Very cool. Well, I think that's a great segue into your two different series. Now, I know that they're related, but can you just tell us a little bit about, I guess, give us a high-level overview of each of them?
So it's all set in the Droughtlands, right? This is the world I've made up for. It's this big desert world, this almost Mad Maxian kind of apocalypse thing, but they've got magic as well. They've got these runes that they like draw on their arms. It's a one-use thing. It needs water, but water's like such a valuable resource already, right? And I'm not going to get into why. But anyway, the point is that there's also these ruins of sci-fi civilizations poking up through these red sands, all these red sand dunes, right? Because I'm Australian, I love that kind of setting. Right. And it's these weird ancient sci-fi towers. They lead down to these underseas where there's this other incomprehensible magic left behind by this extinct people who just wipe themselves out with their own magic. So people who go down there, they find these incomprehensible treasures, but at the same time, they don't come back the same. But anyway, all that's the setting. The books themselves, it's all kind of this big roadmap that I have here as well. So as you can see, it's multiple series happening kind of across this big publishing timeline I have, and you can bounce between them to see all those Easter eggs. So Molten Flux and the Flux Catastrophe, the book one of that is like more Mad Maxian. It's more action. I wanted to write these big gunfights for this giant walking fortress of scrap metal. It gets into this really big element of machine magic that's part of my world. And then the first Hythero series, it's almost like Last Airbender kind of thing. You know, it's a boy out of time trying to figure out how to bring back rain to this to this really parched land. But then he realizes that his people who did that, there was a reason why they took it away. There's a reason why his people went extinct as well. And there's probably a reason why he shouldn't bring back rain. And so it's untangling that kind of big history and how it relates to everything else. And so, yeah, there's a lot going on. I think it's really nice having multiple kind of ways to get into the series and multiple different vibes. But yeah, anyway, you tell me to stop. I've been rambling for a bit, but no, that's the summary.
That all sounds great, and definitely we'll pick away at some pieces in there. First, I want to talk for those people listening who might not be watching the video. When you held up the
sorry, forgot about that.
No, it's okay. I'd like to know a little bit more now. Do you have you had a number of books planned out for obviously future releases? Now, how did that happen? I guess first of all.
Yeah, so it kind of comes down to the alternating release pattern I did start with. When I did turn to self-publishing, when I thought I'm going to have a go at this, both Molten Flux and the Hythero Redux were mostly written or just done, right? So I didn't want to sit on one series while I wrote the other one. So I did start alternating, and it has been nice writing like that because it gives me a break from each series. The characters don't get stale. I don't get sick of them as well, and they don't get sick of me. And so I thought to myself, like with these kind of alternating series, like even after I finish one series, I can chuck another one into the mix and keep bouncing between them. And having these stories being told in different time periods means that I can kind of plant different parts of history and tell this larger overarching story between all that as well. So that's why I've gone with those alternating series. For those listening, there was 4 different series listed there. There's another 2 that I'm planning to start writing next year and start publishing next year. And yeah, so there'll be like a lot of ways to get into it, a lot of different reading orders as well that you can argue over. And I think that's just a really interesting way to kind of experience a story, right?
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Now, how far in advance are these planned out for? If assuming everything goes to plan.
Assuming it, that's the important
Yeah.
phrase. Assuming everything goes to plan. I mean, yeah, I guess they're planned in the sense of like this is what one thing will lead to in another. But I'd say the most recent book I finished, the High Thera Origin, that's the second book in its series. That had me planning things about 5 books in advance.
Okay.
Because there's just like little details, little red herrings and stuff that I'm leaving behind, little like just throwaway lines that will become very relevant, or like you'll be like, oh, that's what that meant, or that's what that related to, or that's why someone said this, or that's why like someone saw something like this. Stuff like that is what I'm leaving behind. So there's a lot of planning going into it, but the reason I can do that is because a lot of the kind of future books are still kind of embryonic at the moment. They're just kind of goopy. They can still take whatever shape they want. I don't know exactly what I need to do with them yet, but I know what needs to go in there.
Yeah, very cool. So now, and how are you keeping track of all that? Because you have these 120, 140,000 word books. How are you keeping track of those Easter eggs and everything that you've developed into this world?
It's just all up in the head, really. I do need to act like there's a bunch of notes I have scattered around, but I always find that like one note system gets so large and kind of messy that it necessitates another note system to keep track of it, and then it's just kind of starts stacking up on itself. Another person, I think I forgot what his name is, but the host of the podcast Writing Quest, he put me on to this thing he'd been doing with an offline ChatGPT model where he fed all his books in and he could ask it questions as to, hey, what happened to this character in this book? Right. And it would give him that summary. Okay. So I need to set that up because that sounds like a really useful thing.
Yeah, I question the accuracy of some of those models at this point. Like it's like I played around with some of that for and I was underwhelmed. It's not something I would trust for sure. Oh, but no, at this stage, right? Isn't. But I know people that are using it and it seems to be working for them. But yeah, like I also marvel at when I ask that question and authors are like, I've got it all in my head. Like, what? I would not stay in my head for very long. So
no,
I need to, if I've got something like that, I've got to put it somewhere and hopefully I can find that somewhere later. But I've started to use Trello is kind of how I have mapped certain some of those things out. But yeah, that's impressive. Now tell me about a little bit more about this world and a little bit of how you came about imagining this world, and all of a sudden you've got a multi-series book world based within it.
Like essentially, like I've come to a point where I've bitten off more than I can chew, right? I think the best way to put it is like all writers, or just everyone who even kind of has like they think they want to write a book, or they do, write a book. That first book they write when they're like a teenager that needs to be put in a box and then thrown into a ditch and burned and buried. Everyone has one of those. And I'm no exception, right? The Droughtlands wasn't something I came up with until like when I was about 21. So, I was still like, I've been writing for a while, but it was still a long time from now. I had that old world and I was finally getting to the point where like, I can't do it anymore. I need to give it up. I need to just burn it and bury it. And I just had this idea of just this big sweeping wave of sand and that just wiped it out, just buried it. And there was only just the points of those skyscrapers that remained. And it was just such a contrast, just this like these shining shards of steel against this red, orange flow of constant dunes. And that's where it started for me. And everything just kind of expanded outwards from there. And a lot of my world building has just been like, I haven't done like background work. I don't just sit down and world build for world building's sake. I do it as the story explores it.
Right.
And yeah, that's how it's all kind of came about for me. I don't think there's much of that old before world that actually is left. There's like maybe one or two names for characters, but everything else is just like evolved and twisted and changed into its new kind of now published form, which hopefully is much better than the way I wrote it when I was 15.
I'm sure it is. That's usually the way it goes. Yeah. That's really cool. Now, So this is a post-apocalyptic setting. That's how you're kind of branding it. It sounds like there's a lot of fantasy in there. How do you balance, I guess, post-apocalypse? I guess I'll ask another question first because it'll make more sense. Is this like is this an Earth post-apocalypse, or is it like a secondary world?
It's all original. You're not going to have any Earth references. You're not going to come across Statue of Liberty. You're not going to say they blew it all up.
Yeah, okay. So it's a post-apocalypse of a secondary world.
Exactly. And it's a distant post-apocalypse. It's a 10,000, 100,000 years. Like, you don't even know why these skyscrapers still exist, right? There's something wrong with them if they do.
Right. So how do you, I guess, let's bring it back to that original question that I had. How do you balance the post-apocalyptic elements with the fantasy elements to make it something that feels familiar to maybe fans of both?
Yeah. I tend to treat post-apocalypse and fantasy and sci-fi to some degree as the same thing. Like, magic and technology in those settings are both meant to be, in an apocalyptic settings, are both meant to be mysterious. It's meant to be unexplainable. It's meant to be something that's forgotten. So balancing that means that, you know, there still is like the idea of like, you know, it's a wasteland out there. There's not many people out there. You still have to like really kind of strive to survive, right? But at the same time, there is those echoes of something else entirely that is there. There always has been those echoes. And you know it's something that will probably last beyond you. And so it's about kind of creating those different layers between like the people who made the skyscrapers and died out, the different settings of the different series in the books, which is why I like kind of jumping between the time periods, because you do see like those layers of time slowly build up. And like the way that those ruins get left behind. Like, I think a really fun example of it is like the guy who found the city of Troy, where the Battle of Troy took place. He followed the Iliad and then just started digging, and there's just different layers of this city that have been occupied over the years that he had to dig through and figure out which one was the right one he was looking for. And it was off by 2 layers. I think that's how it goes.
Yeah, cool. So, yeah, tell me a little bit more about the magic system that you've created, because that sounds really interesting, especially in this world that sounds like there's some forgotten magic, and there's some, and I mean, definitely correct me if I'm wrong here, that there's some magic that they know of and there's some magic that's forgotten. Like, how did that come about, and how did you kind of work with that?
Yeah. So for the magic that's known, it's done by a series of runes that are painted onto skin, and they kind of translate meaning into life when they're used. So they're one-shot things. They are made with inks using water. I've magicked out the water because I didn't want to write a desert story where the whole plot point is always, damn, I'm thirsty. Right. So that's a whole other magic reason. So read the Hythera Redux if you want to see that properly explained. But the runes... for those on video, I'm holding up now just a part of the book where it shows some of the runes that are very important. They're like blocky kind of 3x3 squares. And it's your standard 4 magic system. You've got people who use really machine-based magnetic magic, which they use to make machines called Arcanites. That comes into play heavily in the Flux series. You've got people who can manipulate air and wind. You've got people who can kind of manipulate fire and light. And also cauterize wounds shut, which is a bit grisly. And then you have people who can summon rain and storms and lightning. And that's the Hythera. So that's the extinct people that are kind of the main focus of that series. And so that's kind of like my traditional 4 magic thing that I'm kind of twisting up. But then there's this idea of an unbound magic, one left behind by those people of those ruins. I call them those of glass. So this unbound magic, it's dangerous, right? It's one that makes you question yourself, and you question what's the difference between the magic they left and the things we take for granted in this world. Like, what's the difference between gravity and magic? Is gravity magic? Are other people magic? Are they existing purely just by the thoughts they're having? Am I existing purely by the thoughts I'm having? And the problem is, when you start asking these dangerous questions, you start getting dangerous answers. Why should I exist? And then when you can't answer that question because it is all magic, it is made up, then something bad happens to you. I'm not going to tell you what because it's a spoiler, but you should read the books if you want to find out.
Yeah. Very interesting.
So that's the way it kind of lays in, and you can probably see this like contradiction between the magic that I explained with the runes and this unbound magic. There's a link there as well, right?
Yeah, as one would expect, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love that. I love that so much. I want to talk about the Hythero Redux in the first Hythero series, because that is, you do have a new book coming out in that series. So first, I guess, just tell us a little bit more about, I guess, set up that novel for us and tell us a little bit about how that goes.
Definitely. So the story follows Spirik. He's a 14-year-old boy who's awoken among these ruins, buried in sand, and he has to hunt for his memories. He's had them all be stolen, right? His only help is from an old exiled academic who doesn't even believe these are Hythero until Spirik manages to prove it to him. And then, yeah, as I said before, as he goes across the Droughtlands, people see him and they think, this is it. Rain's coming back. We can all have magic again. You know, it's not going to be this like once in a lifetime thing when you get a vial of water to make a few runes for yourself. But then as his memories returns, he realizes what his people were. The empire they ran, the power they held over people by the fact that they could control rain. And so he wonders, why is he here if not to bring back rain? Maybe he's here for something else. And that's kind of the way the story flows out. And so the first book really focuses on that initial journey for him. It's finding those memories. And then the second book is dealing with the consequences of that as another Hythero returns. And he meets them and he has to confront.
That sounds so interesting. Did you find anything challenging as you were putting this series together?
Oh, yeah, God. Hythero books are very complicated to write. To digress for a moment, I was originally, after finishing the Flux series, which I'm on the cusp of doing, which is really exciting, I was going to go back in and write the third Hythero book, but I'm actually going to shuffle around my release order to write a new book, just because each Hythero book I need to plot out the things that happened in the present, the things that happened in the time of Spirik's people, so 1,000 years before, when the Hythero Empire still stood, just before it fell. And then I need to plot out things that happened to those of Glass, because the reason he can remember things has something to do with them, which I'm not going to get into for spoilers anyway. And then that means that I'm plotting out 3 different things at once.
Right.
And then there's another layer of plotting. I'll need to figure out the stuff that happened in the future as well. So, yeah, as I said before, they're very complicated books to write. Like, writing the second book was just mind-bending for me. And I hope it's mind-bending for other people reading it, but not in a bad way. But, yeah terribly complicated. The Flux books are a bit more straightforward. I'd say the third book's been a bit more complicated, just because trying to wrap it all up and make it a big, huge ending has been hard.
I love it. I love the idea. I love the concepts. And I really do love that you've got these 2 different series that you're working on that are interconnected and based in the same world, but yet highlighting different aspects of the world. I think that's really cool. Yeah,
exactly it.
Yeah, really cool. Now, like as we mentioned, you've kind of been marketing these a bit as a post-apocalyptic. Have you found any challenges as in marketing them as post-apocalyptic, kind of in the state of the world that we're in right now? Have you gotten any pushback on that, does having them in a secondary world negate some of that?
I think having them in a secondary world negates a lot of that. I think it's very clear from the outset that it's a clear work of fantasy. Like, I pitch Molten Flux as a mutiny aboard a walking fortress of scrap metal. There's no possible allegories I could be making to, the military-industrial complex, right? So, yeah, it is all in a secondary world. I haven't had too much pushback about it being post-apocalyptic. I think the hardest thing has been, like, trying to find the exact niche for it, because it's a really unique proposition, right? It's not quite science fiction. It's not quite fantasy. It's not quite post-apocalyptic, to be honest with you. I just say that because it's the easiest way to say, here's the idea. Trying to find the niche for it and trying to just find the simple genre to pitch it to people with, that's hard. But I think I found a lot of success, especially in person, just by displaying the book covers and the sheer violent shades of orange they take. And that's drawn a lot of people in. And then, I can hit them with the passion like this, and that really gets them excited for it. Hopefully I'm getting you excited for it now.
Absolutely, yeah. You really are. And clearly the covers definitely say, post-apocalyptic. If you're into, that sort of ruined world, they definitely highlight that. And they're super eye-catching. So, I think you've targeted them well that way.
Oh, thank you.
Is post-apocalyptic something that you enjoy as a genre, and kind of what the things that you read and write or read and watch, I should say? And what type of post-apocalyptic scenarios interest you the most?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think post-apocalypse, like both as a genre and as like a background idea to another genre, I think it is a really interesting place. And I did a big like kind of talk about like these key elements in it for the Right Hive Con that just passed. That I'm still waiting for them to put on YouTube. Hurry up, guys! Come on. I'm just kidding. I think I find a lot of interest in a post-apocalyptic setting the further it is from its event. I don't like recent post-apocalypse settings because a lot of the stories are either driven by, oh, we have to survive, or oh, we're reordering society.
Right.
I just find it dull. When you go further forward, when everything's been properly forgotten, and when you are kind of digging out the remnants and trying to reinterpret them, that's where I find it really interesting. There's a video game I was playing recently called Sable, which is like, I think I like to describe it as like, it's a bit like playing Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, but with zero combat, and you just have a nice hover bike to jet around the desert sands with and just explore. And that's a really fun game I guess, like a really fun idea of like, yeah, there was once an apocalypse, but it's not even something we think about anymore. Like you see these signs of derelict ruins of spaceships, but it's not something you like. It's not your concern. You're just there to hang out. So yeah, that cool kind of idea. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And that kind of reminds me of Horizon Zero Dawn, the video game. If you played that one,
that's
as
it.
well.
Yeah.
Where it's you're kind of obviously in a post-apocalyptic world. There's these machines and whatnot.
Machines.
Yeah, and and in a similar vein is that there's obviously a secret history that you're out to discover in that game as well. Have you played that game?
I haven't. I don't have a PlayStation. I'm really sad.
You definitely should.
But like I've watched videos, man. Like I think it's a really cool concept. I love it.
Yeah, it's. I mean, to be honest, one of the best games I've played now. And I don't have a lot of time to play video games, but that one was.
Yeah, I mean, like you didn't waste your time with that, right?
I didn't waste
like imagine
time.
if you come in, and you're just like, oh man, Call of Duty like 7. That was the best game I played. Actually, I get it. Some people like Call of Duty. Some people
too. So what do you hope that readers take away from these books as they go into them?
That's the like the the themes, right? Like, I think like the books have become, in retrospect, a really personal project for me. Like, I've noticed a lot more of myself than I expected appearing in these, in the main characters, especially. And I relate a lot of kind of my weaknesses or my anxieties to stuff that Spirik and Riser, who's the protagonist of the Flux series, do. Like, the way they behave, the way they kind of try to deal with the problems at hand. Thankfully, ones I don't need to deal with myself. Right. Or like the way that, especially with Riser, the way he seeks kind of autonomy and control, and yet he still somehow needs to have someone telling him what to do. Like, it's this juxtaposition he's constantly fighting with as he tries to find agency and find purpose to keep him going, especially when he's been through just so much, right?
Yeah.
So I think the thing that I'd like people to take is those really personal stories and a lot of the symbolism those characters encounter of like these unnerving places where they do end up meaning a little bit of something, even if it's something that isn't directly said on the page. It's something that's left to the imagination, because I don't like to, like, I guess, hit people on the head with the meaning. I'm not going to tell you exactly what happened or exactly why it happened or what it means, but I like that people can draw their own conclusions. So I think I want people to take away that as well.
Very cool. Very cool. I love that so much. And you paint a really vivid picture of your stories. And I absolutely can't wait to get to them, because they're right up my alley. I'm always a fan of post-apocalyptic, but post-apocalyptic fantasy is, I absolutely love that. There's something about it that I just eat up. So I can't wait to get to them. Yeah. So we talked about a couple of projects that are upcoming, but is there anything else that readers can expect over the coming, let's say, over the next year or so?
Look, a lot of projects coming up. I'm still toying with the idea of doing a Kickstarter once the Flux series is complete. So that'll either be for an audiobook or special edition hardcovers. with 3D printed models of one of the tiny robot friends found within.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
Which will be hand painted by yours truly, but you're going to have to pay out the nose for it. I'm also like working a lot with my mailing list to get a lot more short stories out through it as well. So I've got a ton that I'm just sitting on. And like some of the advice I got recently is just get them out to the world, right? So if you sign up to my mailing list, you can expect a good flow on of great short stories and great snippets, either from the Droughtlands or from other projects that I've been working on as well. And then I think after that, what I'll be working on is just a lot of marketing. So yeah, just trying to make sure that I'm figuring out how meta ads and stuff work. But that's not really a reader facing thing. They're just going to expect to be bombarded with ads until they buy damn books.
Right. Awesome. Very cool. Lots to look forward to for sure. Now, Jonathan, this is the greatest podcast in the multiverse. So can you tell me how in a parallel universe, a different decision might have affected another version of your life?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Now, I think that I wonder what would have I do wonder what would have happened to me if I hadn't quit my job and jumped after publishing full time, right? Like, I was, in a pretty well compensated job. So I do wonder, especially with, the way things are, should I have stayed there? But then I do remember I was a little miserable at the time. I was dealing with a lot of stuff and I did need time to step back and figure out what's important and, be close to my family for a couple other things and, support my wife through a couple other things as well. So I think there is a parallel universe me that is still working full-time in, an actual well-paying job instead of writing books. But I think that person, they wouldn't have finished and published any of these books and they wouldn't have found what meaning there is in the sequel. They wouldn't have even kind of written them the way that they've come out, because the way I'd initially planned a lot of these books that are now coming out, entirely different to how they are now, just because there's been like a couple of years of like reflection and ideation on the ideas. So yeah, I think there's a different version of me out there that just hasn't published anything. And yeah, I don't know. That saddens me a bit, I guess.
That's sad to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm glad I'm here. That's what I'm trying to say.
Excellent. Yes. Well, I'm glad as well. You've turned a lot of ideas into some great books over the last couple of years, and I'm very happy for that. Can you tell our listeners where the best place to find you and get a hold of your books is?
Yeah, so best place to find me, my website is jonathanweiss.com.au. I'm on Instagram as jonathanw_author. Getting a hold of my books, they're all on Amazon. You can get them as ebooks. They're on Kindle Unlimited, so you can start reading right now. And you can also go to my website and order directly from me. You'll get signed copies, which is especially good if you're Australian because you won't have to eat international shipping. But yeah, I've got the High Theros Origin Book 2 of the first High Theros series coming out on August 27th. If you're interested in being an advanced reader for that as well, hit me up as well. I'm always taking more on board. And then, yeah, hopefully after that, in 4 or 5 months after, I'm going to have Book 3 of the Flux Catastrophe coming out and finishing the series.
Very cool. Very cool. Lots to look forward to there. I will be sure to link all of those in the show notes for our listeners. Thank you once again, Jonathan. This has been a lot of fun.
It's been a blast. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed the show, like and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Greatest Podcast in the Multiverse. As well, you can help support the show by supporting me on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, you can get early access to the show, as well as submit your questions for my upcoming guests. I hope to see you next time. Bye now.